All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about Errol Spence Jr. and Roy Jones Jr., Terence Crawford, little Antonio Tarver, and what they had to say about if this fight would happen and who would win. And once again, Roy short stepping on Errol Spence Jr. But let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're in the welterweight division and talking about what some of the legends in the game had to say about the Errol Spence Terence Crawford fight, whether it would happen, and how they see it playing out. Specifically, Roy Jones Jr., who, man, I'm going to tell you, man, these guys some big Terence Crawford fans, which always makes me nervous about the fight. But before I get into that, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a longtime subscriber or supporter to the channel, thank you so much for your continued support. Make sure you hit that like button down below, help out the channel. Also, if you're new to the channel, please accept my invitation to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more content. Also, just so you know, we do drop content pretty much on a daily basis, and we do live streams every day. So there's always a really good place for you to go to a boxing community and have a really good conversations about boxing, regardless of whether you agree with this guy, that guy. And we talk about pretty much all the boxers at one point in time or another. So make sure you guys just continue to join in and enjoy the discussion. All right, so let's get into this, man. Obviously, you know, right now is a little bit of a dead period in boxing. We just had a bunch of, a bunch of great fights over the last several months, pretty much back to back. So now we're in a phase where we're waiting to know what is going to happen in the second half of the year. Showtime has not come out with their schedule for the second half of the year. We don't know whether or not Fox is going to be involved in boxing during the second half of the year, right? We know that we've got a few fights that are out there, like Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin in September. But the big fight that everybody is waiting to know about is the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight that one day looks like, you know, because we follow all the news, right? So, you know, it's going to be up and down. But, you know, man, that's one of the great things about being a boxing fan, or one of the major things about being a boxing fan is the conversations that go on in between the fights. So it is what it is. But you know, it's not for certain that Errol Spence Jr. is going to be fighting Terence Crawford, even though the signs are better that it's going to happen than they have ever been. And I personally believe that the fight will happen. Roy Jones Jr. was asked his opinion about it on his Pro Box podcast, which he does along with Paulie Malignaggi and Antonio Tarver, which is a real funny mix, man. You know, you got two guys that were big enemies, both from Florida, big enemies during their professional career, Roy Jones and Antonio Tarver. And then you got Paulie Malignaggi in the middle, who's had his own, you know, his own foibles coming out of his mouth over the last couple of years. But at the same time, all those guys really do know boxing. So it's great, interesting to hear what they have to say. Now, as far as the fight being made, Roy Jones Jr. says that he will believe it when he sees it. With all of these promoters having their own instinct, you know, and their own desires and all that stuff in the fight, that he believes that you could still wind up having the fight not take place, because when you're with a promoter, you know, your promoter has your own, you know, their own interest at heart. And that really does hold up and hurt the sport of boxing. So as far as this fight being made, he said he'll believe it when he sees it, because he's just been upset too many times with big fights not taking place. Now, honestly, though, I don't think in this particular, strictly what he's saying in this instant is probably a little bit off, because it is not a promoter that's going to hold this fight up. It very well may be an advisor, an advisor manager, or it may be a network. But right now, Terence Crawford, strictly speaking, does not have a promoter, and Errol Spence Jr., strictly speaking, does not have a promoter. So that would be up to both of them. Now, obviously, you have the network, Showtime, and whether or not they're going to pay for the fight. Al Heyman, whether or not he has vision, because he advisor, manager, whatever you call him, he definitely has a vision for what he wants to take place over a series, over a course of time. So yeah, obviously that will still come into play, but I'm optimistic. Now, the most interesting thing though is that Roy Jones Jr., in my opinion, is still seriously underestimating Errol Spence Jr. Now, the three people picked who they thought the winner of the fight was going to be, Roy Jones Jr. leaned towards Terence Crawford because he said, look, we've seen Terence Crawford fight and do all kind of different things in the ring, and we've seen Errol Spence Jr. do one thing, and he's done one thing very, very well, but just one thing well. Same thing with Antonio Tarver said that, he did one thing, he does one thing well, and so that was the story. You got a guy that does one thing well, and you have a guy that does a bunch of things in the ring, so they're going to go with the guy that's going to figure it out and figure out how to stop the guy that is just, is pretty much just coming forward and doing one thing in the ring, right? Now, Paulie Malignaggi said something a little bit different, which was, look, Errol Spence Jr., and this is interesting too, because I think in this incident, who has actually seen who fight the most. With Roy Jones Jr., Roy Jones has seen a lot of Terence Crawford. With Tarver, he has seen, I don't know who he's seen, because he was covering Showtime. He was at Showtime early in Errol Spence Jr.'s career, but Paulie Malignaggi pretty much covered a ton of Errol Spence Jr. fights, right? So it's almost broken up by the network that these guys were commentating for at one point, at a point in time, and who they're the most familiar with, right? Well, Paulie Malignaggi said thinks that, well, Errol is not one of these guys that are just pressuring and coming in there, just recklessly coming in there. He's somebody that's coming in behind a jab. He's coming in there with slightly different angles, and he is working himself into the punch zone, right? And getting there honestly. He's not getting in there and selling himself out to get hit with a bunch of stuff while he's coming in. But Roy Jones Jr. is just the kind of guy. And I think, let me say, I understand why a lot of people think Terence Crawford will win this fight. But I'm glad that at least in the conversation that everybody in there acknowledges, like, look, man, this is going to be a heck of a fight. It could go either way, but I'm leaning towards this guy or I'm leaning towards that guy. Now, the consistency in which what they're saying it pretty much tells me that they are really a little bit stronger in believing Terence Crawford will win that fight than otherwise. And also, that's the type of fighter that Roy Jones Jr. is, that athletic dude that can do a bunch of different things. And they're probably also looking at it in the way that they would approach the fight with guys and saying, man, if you can do this, if you can do that, you can do this, you can do that, that's going to allow you to, basically overcome a guy that, in their opinion, is really just coming forward at them. However, just my take on the matter is that Errol is not that traditional. He's not that traditional, just straight up pressure fighter. He's definitely a pressure cooker, but he's not the type of guy that is just coming in there recklessly or whatever. But hopefully we get the fight so that we can see it. Roy picked Terence Crawford. Antonio Tarver picked Terence Crawford. Paulie Malignaggi picks Errol Spence Jr. And it's really great observations all the way around on it. And for me, I have Errol Spence Jr. in the fight because of pretty much for the same reason that Paulie Malignaggi said, the pressure, and whether or not Terence Crawford is going to be able to deal with that pressure. Now, being able to deal with a pressure with a guy that doesn't do it effectively, or a guy that's not as athletic or is not as strong, right, or is technically sound and doesn't have as many holes, if you're a super athlete and super skilled fighter, you should be able to get by that. But if in cases where you have somebody that is really at your level. And the question is going to be whether or not Terence Crawford can get Errol Spence Jr. up out of that. And that's another thing that Roy said, is whether or not he's going to be able to earn Errol's respect and push Errol back. If he can't push Errol back, then it's going to be trouble for Terence, according to Roy. But anyway, good conversation. Just wanted to give you my thoughts on that. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.